So, welcome ARC Youth. This is your youth message, and hope you're all doing well and looking after yourselves at this time. So, we've got a Easter message this morning on the resurrection, and I wonder if you remember some couple of months ago when we did on a Sunday morning, we studied this in our group, and we had a really good discussion around death and dying, and you had some interesting thoughts about it. So I just want to give you a little quiz this morning to begin with. And so my first question to you is, we're doing this from the Gospel of John. So what did Mary see when she first looked in the tomb of Jesus? What did Mary see when she first looked in the tomb of Jesus? Second question. What did Peter and John see when they first looked in the tomb of Jesus? And then third question, what question do the angels and Jesus ask Mary? And then third question, who does Mary think Jesus is when he first appears to her? So have a go at that quiz, and for the answers we're going to have a look at John's Gospel. So our first reading is in John 20 and verse 1. Early on the first day of the week, while it was still dark, Mary Magdalene went to the tomb and saw that the stone had been removed from the entrance. And then jumping on to verse 11. But Mary stood outside by the tomb weeping, and as she wept, she stooped down and looked into the tomb. And she saw two angels in white sitting, one on the head and the other at the feet, where the body of Jesus had lain. And then they said to her, "Woman, why are you weeping?" And she said to them, "Because they've taken away my Lord, and I do not know where they have laid him." Now when she said this, she turned around and saw Jesus standing there, and did not know that it was Jesus. Jesus said to her, "Woman, why are you weeping? Whom are you seeking?" She, supposing him to be the gardener, said to him, "Sir, if you have carried him away, tell me where you have laid him, and I will take him away." And Jesus said to her, "Mary." She turned and she said to him, "Rabboni," which is to say, "Teacher." And Jesus said to her, "Do not cling to me, for I have not yet ascended to my Father, but go to my brethren and say to them, I am ascending to my Father and your Father, to my God and your God." Mary Magdalene came and told the disciples that she had seen the Lord and that he had spoken these things to her. Now the angels ask Mary a question. They ask her, "Why are you crying?" And when I stopped and I reflected on this question, I felt that this question was about stopping and acknowledging what Mary was crying for. Perhaps she was crying because when she said to them, "They've taken away my Lord," she thought about all the things that had now been taken away from her. You see, they'd taken away love, and I don't know where I'll find it. They've taken away kindness, and I don't know where to find it. They've taken away what makes me whole, and I don't know where to find it. I like this quote, "Grief is the price we pay for loving." Whenever we open up our hearts to love someone, we open up our hearts to experience grief when we lose them. We too must answer that question, "Why are you crying?" Each of us will experience at some point losing someone we love, and our tears are not a lack of faith or a sign of unbelief. I believe that tears are holy and sacred to Jesus, who himself also knew how to weep at his friend's graveside. Tears have a way of speaking what we cannot put into words. They acknowledge how much we will miss that person's voice, their laughter, their touch, their funny ways. Tears release the feeling that death is the thief that has robbed us too early of our loved ones. Why are you crying? The question that invites us to acknowledge what we are feeling and gives us the permission to grieve fully. John says that while it was still dark, Mary stood at the tomb weeping. Interestingly, just earlier, Peter and John had run to the tomb, and when they looked in, they saw only laundry. But when Mary looks in, she sees angels. And it's then that Jesus appears to Mary whilst she is still in her darkness, and she thinks he's the gardener. But the resurrected Jesus calls her name, Mary, and suddenly light floods into Mary, and she calls out, Rabboni. Can you imagine what Mary would have felt when she heard her name from the lips of Jesus? But Jesus had a special commission for Mary. He tells her, go and be my first witness to the resurrection. And I want to ask this question, why was Mary chosen to be the first witness of the resurrection? You see, to me it would appear that Jesus is not following all the rules here. Mary doesn't fit the description of an ideal preacher. She never came up through rabbinic school, and Luke tells us that Jesus cast 7 demons out of her. So why does Jesus pick her to be the first witness? I believe that she was chosen not despite who she was, but because of who she was. She knew what it was for God to move, not when the flowers are out or the lights are on, but while it is still dark. Mary had experienced Jesus meeting her in the darkest place of her life, and one meeting with him had transformed her entire world. That first resurrection morning speaks to each one of us and tells us that while it was still dark, death was being defeated. While it was still dark, the grave and the tomb will never have the last word. And while it is still dark today, each one of you young people at ARC are to be witnesses like Mary, to share the good news that a whole new kingdom has come and is coming. While it was still dark, God's future arrived in the present, and through the resurrection of Jesus, we are now signposts to his kingdom. Every time you perform an act of kindness, every time you show and live gratitude, every time you make a personal sacrifice, you are living witnesses of that resurrection. This week, be signposts of God's new creation and look for where it is still dark and bring the light of the resurrection through your love and kindness.